We cannot let the cure be worse than the problem itself. We're not going to let the cure be worse than the problem.
And my flower was like all those other flowers because I had fetched her a screen and put a glass bowl over her at night and listened when she grumbled, and now she was my rose.
Welcome to In Pursuit of Truth. This is your host, Sir Patrick Mack. We are back, and you are watching part 2 of an ongoing series entitled The Bite. I posted part 1 on March 26, 2020. If you've not yet seen it, I highly suggest checking that out before this video, as we will essentially be building off a lot of the information that I introduced in the first video. So that is The Bite, part 1 from March 26, 2020. And please understand that, like I said, this is an ongoing series, so there will probably be some follow-up videos to come with this, as this is a very big topic, and I think it's very important to understand all aspects as to why this is important. But to quickly recap, we were talking a great deal about a substance known as adrenochrome, which is essentially oxidized adrenaline. We were talking about the various materials and metals that are used in the oxidation process and how that affects the substance itself, how the substance is relevant to today's events. We were also talking a bit about the EpiPen industry and its direct relation to adrenochrome, as well as the medical system and our current school system, and how all of this may or may not be related to coronavirus. Now, in the first video, we covered a lot of science, and of course, I made the clarification right off the bat that I am not a scientist, I am not a reporter, I am a researcher, and I'm doing my best to share with you what I'm able to find. And I was really overwhelmed at the response on the first video, in particular from the scientific community. I'm incredibly grateful. I'm not so sure I completely understood a lot of your theories, but many of you showed a great interest in this topic, and I really have to tell you that I appreciate it, and that is why we are probably going to turn this into a series, because there are a lot of different ways we can go with this topic. But for now, what I really want to point out in today's video is not so much the science of adrenochrome, although we are going to start off with this journal right here. But I really want to draw some direct correlations between our entertainment industry, in particular Hollywood, the film industry, because that seems to be the community that has such a high rate of usage of adrenochrome, and they've been telling us for a very long time. Much of this I want to illustrate today so that people who are not very familiar with this topic can kind of see this on a different level, see a lot of the symbolism and the messages that have been sent to us and our children for many years. So that being said, we are going to start off with this document. We actually covered a little bit from this guy, A. Hoffer. This is a document from 1962. We actually covered a document in the previous video from 1981. This A. Hoffer from the University of Saskatchewan has been working on adrenochrome for quite some time. And we saw that the studies of adrenochrome were going on for many, many years. Like I pulled out in the last video, as far back as 1934. Let me draw this first part up here. The purest preparations of adrenochrome available between 1954 and 1957 were bright red or black powders, which were very unstable even when stored under optimal conditions at low temperature and devoid of oxygen. Okay, so there are many different forms of adrenochrome, and depending on the materials that they use for the oxidation process or even before the oxidation process, seems to have a really big effect on what is otherwise a seemingly very unstable solution. Now, I'm going to attempt to break up some of the scientific monotony today by going back and forth between some real world examples. I fully understand that many of my regular viewers are already very familiar with the process and the substance adrenochrome, probably even more so than myself, but we still have many people who don't understand that this is being produced and sold and why it's relevant. So I want to show you this here, and of course it's being sold right online. No, this is not the deep web. This is Alibaba.com. And as you can see, many different forms here. Now, keep in mind, the production and sale of adrenochrome is not illegal. You can produce this inorganically, and organically, I would imagine it's maybe not the most ethical thing, but it doesn't seem to be illegal. And as you can see, many different colors here, many different substances, and it varies in quality, as you can see by the different pricing here. So if you see some of these other ones here, like from $1 to $500 a kilogram, you can get carbazochrome, which is related, of course, to adrenochrome. And, of course, it's got kind of looks to be a bit of a pinkish hue here. And we have all kinds of different prices. It looks like the ones that are more of an orange color are not as pure. You have this one down here, raw material but high purity, selling for $100 to $500 a kilogram. So it starts to get a little bit more expensive. And keep in mind, we talked about the different oxidation rates and the different processes in order to create any kind of quality adrenochrome. Now we have over here, this is one that seems to be one of the more expensive ones, $1,600 to $1,800 a kilogram. And as you can see right there, it says hot selling human adrenochrome. Well, knowing what we know about the production of adrenochrome, the best way to get it, of course, is from the adrenal glands, and it's naturally produced. And of course, and in any mammal, the oxidation can be done right inside the body. But this is usually done in heightened states of fear or torture. And as you can see, they're advertising this right online, hot selling human adrenochrome. And here is a still picture here because I really want you to note the symbolism that we're talking today, with the roses garnering the plate. Now, another thing I want to point out here is that all these different manufacturers that at least are on this page are coming from China, Shanghai, Xi'an, Shaanxi. All of these, Xi'an, all of these are coming from China. Now, some of them looks to be the ones that are the more cheaper versions, tend to be the more raw materials, but it seems like the higher priced ones are directly from source, being human. So we just showed you some of the purest forms in that powder right there. Let's go back to this journal. The purest preparations of adrenochrome available between 1954 and 1957 were bright red or black powders, which were very unstable even when stored under optimal conditions at low temperature and devoid of oxygen. Okay, so even when they take oxygen out of the process, this is still an unstable substance. You just saw it in a powder like that, and it looks like they've known about this for a very long time. And of course, we also know now that some of the purest forms of adrenochrome come directly from the source, and we've even seen it sold straight from the human. That's exactly how it was advertised, right? Adrenochrome in aqueous solution deteriorated in minutes and formed insoluble brown-black melanins. And that's important to remember too, that one of the substances that kind of gets produced out of this process is melanin, which is an incredibly valuable substance. Removed traces of silver ion from the preparations of adrenochrome and formed stable crystals, which could be stored at room temperature. So that's where we go. Now it can form crystals which can be stored at room temperature. That's a lot more stable. Now there's another mention of this down here. A dose of 10 milligrams per kilogram of crystalline adrenochrome in saline injected intravenously caused convulsions and death in half the treated rats in less than 15 minutes. After 8 milligrams per kilogram, their physical activity was greatly reduced for many hours. On observing some of these rats given adrenochrome, it was noted that for the first few minutes, the animals appeared sick, but this soon passed. Okay, so this is a form, but it doesn't look like it's very, very perfect. And the reason I bring it up is because we're going to see some references later that have to do with crystallized adrenochrome. Now, let me point this out in part 2 here. Biochemistry of Adrenochrome, the very second line. The instability of adrenochrome, adrenoleutin, and 5,6-dihydroxy and methylindole in aqueous solution leads to great difficulties in working with these substances. So once again, they're pointing out that this is a very difficult substance to work with. And I keep kind of harping on this, and there's a very specific reason for this. Let me take you to the last line. Reducing agents discharge the red color of adrenochrome solutions and cause an internal rearrangement of the molecule, forming quantities of 5,6-dihydroxy and methylindole and adrenoleutin. Okay, so whether we understand the science completely on that or not, the point that I want to make is that this is unstable, and they have a lot of problems when dealing with it in aqueous solution. So keep in mind, people want pure adrenochrome if they can get it, right? And of course, the purest way is from the source, which is obviously not very pretty. But it seems like shipping this is not very easy. Handling this is not very easy. Moving it around is not very easy. It's all about how it's housed, right? And I pointed out in my last video that they were showing studies, showed a lot of different reactions to these substances depending on what they were housed in, the very vials that they were held in, whether they were glass or lead or whatever it was, affected these substances greatly. And that's very important considering we're dealing with a substance that it seems like a lot of people really, really want. Now, for a little bit more extra context, I want to refer you to a couple of my older videos from not too long ago, the 15th and the 17th respectively. The first one being entitled Lend Me Your Ear, and the second one being entitled Up to Snuff. And although we covered a few things, I pointed out a story there that may have confused some of you, and rightfully so. But in one that I was talking about was regards to this tweet from an actor, oddly enough, named Orlando Bloom, okay? And he was wearing this odd getup. I know it's not a romper, but I like to call it a romper. And he's got vases all over it. Looks like Chinese vases. I found that very, very curious. Keep in mind, we're talking about things that would hold unstable liquids. Now, what made this story unique were a few things. You'll have to go watch the video if you want the whole context, but there seemed to have been some sort of answer. Not sure if it was direct or not. Maybe it was just coincidence. But we had, shortly after that, we had this tweet, an odd tweet from Marsha Blackburn, Senator Marsha Blackburn, who's wearing pajamas that look a lot like his little getup. And they have also Chinese bottles, although these are Chinese snuff bottles. And I went through the trouble of explaining the significance of Chinese snuff bottles as a status symbol. Remember, the elite pass these around. And back in the day, snuff would, of course, was kind of known to cure some things, but a lot of people carried their snuff in and would offer it to their buddies. But the point of pulling out the bottle was to show your fancy, fancy bottle. And of course, these were well-made bottles, and they sell for sometimes millions of dollars online still to this day. Why would that be important? Because these are quality bottles, quality glassware, things that you might be able to store unstable liquids in. I don't know, but I found it very curious that these tweets were back to back, and that was the point that I was making. These old snuff bottles would have been very high quality, probably very well sealed, and could probably hold a lot of things. Not necessarily just adrenochrome, but there could be some sort of truth to that. But either way, it was very odd, and Marsha Blackburn never takes videos in her pajamas. So this was an odd response. But the most curious thing about all of this to me was the event that happened in between. And this was a seizing of a whole bunch of these coronavirus testing kits at LAX, and now we've seen a couple of different instances that are the same. More vials of white liquid. And of course, right at the same time period in between these two tweets, we had the very odd timing of President Trump being caught, quote unquote, caught on hot mic saying, do you got any of that white stuff? Well, there was white liquid found in these vials. So is there some sort of relation to this? Could very well be, and of course it could have nothing to do with it at all. But I found it very curious. That's where I was going with it. And if you want more context, please watch those videos for that context. But the point is that it would seem with such an unstable liquid, I don't know if it's unstable liquid, you would really need to probably spend some pretty good money on things that house these liquids. It would probably mean a lot to you. Could that be why these snuff bottles are worth so much, or is it just simply the beautiful artwork? Well, it could be easily the latter, but it was something worth considering. We've seen a lot of talk about vases, urns, china, and I mean china is in like porcelain type chinaware, fine china, and of course snuff bottles and things like this. Is it related? Not really sure, but curious to say the least. Moving forward, blood plasma, which is adjusted to optimal conditions of pH, ionic strength, catalyst, etc., quickly oxidizes epinephrine to adrenochrome. Some of the adrenochrome is rapidly transformed into adrenoleukin. All right, so you can get this from blood plasma, and of course you can get that by donating blood, right? Anytime we have some sort of event, what's the Red Cross asking for? They're asking for you to donate blood. Now that's not necessarily nefarious. Of course you can also donate the plasma too, right? And a lot of times before they ask you to donate blood, they want to make sure that you've got a good bunch of iron in there, right? Iron up your blood before you go donate. And that's, of course, because iron carries the oxygen, and it also apparently assists the oxidation of epinephrine to adrenochrome. So, to all those people who might be of low income, what's one of those ways that you can get yourself a nice little bit of cash every week? Donating plasma. But check out the middle of the paragraph here. Apparently, adrenoleukin and 5,6-dihydroxy and methylindole are relatively stable in plasma. So it's also handy. Now, obviously, if you are going through some sort of reputable agency, as there are many, they can take your blood or your blood plasma, and they can kind of figure out if you've got good optimal levels of iron, or whether there's too much, might be toxic or something like that. There can also be problems of having too much iron, which can be very, very caustic or toxic for your blood, right? And I would imagine if you're doing this sort of thing on a black market, the chances of finding that out the hard way would be a lot more common in the result of too much iron. Now, I mentioned earlier that another product of this process is melanin. Oxidizes simple amino acids and is polymerized to brownish melanin pigments in brain, intestinal mucosa, and skin. So this stuff can actually change your skin color just a little bit. So keep in mind that melanin plays an important role in all of this and is sought after on its own. Melanin is a general term for pigmentation that affects our hair, our eyes, and of course our skin. Now there's a few different kinds of melanin, and I want to point them out because I think it matters. First, you have pheomelanin, which is largely responsible for the lighter skin or the almost pinkish hue that you'll see from time to time, and the red hair, otherwise known as ginger trait. You've probably heard that term being thrown around a lot recently. Then, of course, you have neuromelanin, which is produced in your brain and is used to treat some neurodegenerative disorders like Parkinson's disease, so also very helpful. And then, of course, you have the what we commonly know as eumelanin, which affects a lot of the brown and black skin. Now, this can be a double-edged sword as it can help protect against UV rays and certain kinds of skin cancer and things like that. It also has a very youthful look, which I think is very, very relevant, hence the term black don't crack. And we're going to show you some examples of the popularity of this kind of melanin in just a little bit. But people with higher concentrations of melanin in their skin can also be susceptible to certain kinds of blood disease like sickle cell anemia and things like that. So like I said, it's a bit of a double-edged sword. But at this point in the video, it's important to know that it's important. Now, to illustrate that point, I want to show you this other journal from 1983. This is from the Department of Pathology at Howard University College of Medicine in Washington, D.C. And this is from a Dr. Quang Jiao Fan, who works in the Department of Pathology. And as you can see, it is titled Pineal Calcification Among Black Patients. A post-mortem histopathological study was done in 233 pineal glands of black patients. Well, we just saw that number. It's a very curious number, right? And you may remember from part 1, I mentioned that some of those older studies were being done and funded largely in part by Masonic groups, Masonic lodges. And of course, these are popular numbers for Masonic lodges: 23, 33, 322, 233, variations on that theme. Probably just a coincidence, just saying. Among them, 70% showed microscopic evidence of calcification in pineal parenchyma. Okay, so 70%. That's a large number in black folk, right? And according to this study, it seems to be largely in black people and Asians, which makes a lot of sense when we consider human trafficking around the world. Now note this right here. There are reasons to believe that the pineal gland serves as a regulator of the entire endocrine system, mediated through the hypothalamus and or pituitary gland. In fact, many hormone-related substances have been identified in pineal tissue. Among them, the most important and well-known one is melatonin. We're not going to get way into the science on that, but I just want you to note, also file that again in the back of your head. Melatonin, very important. In ancient pre-Cartesian medicine, the pineal gland was regarded as the memory valve, supported by the observation that men often shook or struck their heads as if to free a stuck valve to remember something. It is conceivable that the pineal stalk area is more subjected to chronic, repeated physical strains of torsion and or traction, especially for those who involve more violent physical activities in their lives. It is reasonable to believe that the calcification seen in the stalk area is a dystrophic one due to chronic tissue damage. Now, I don't want to bore you with the science too much here, but I do want to give you a nice little summary from ellacruz.org, who was basically researching this very same journal. Summary: according to Journal of the National Medical Association, the black and Asian races' pineal glands are more calcified. The study reveals race and melatonin are two factors which affect the amount of calcification in the pineal gland. The report also reveals that the pineal gland, which was referred to as the memory valve in ancient days, is hyperactive in children at the age of puberty. Melatonin affects the sexual cycle of black women, and also that sex hormones and trauma both intensify the process of the calcification of the gland. Hear that again. Sex hormones and trauma both intensify the process of the calcification of the gland. The report proves that black and Asian races have a more calcified pineal gland because of the high amount of melatonin, and this would likely lead to a thicker, creamier substance being known as adrenochrome that would probably suggest why black and Asian races are so popular in the human trafficking process. And I suppose if you're able to dial into someone's memory valve, that would help you program them a lot easier, which of course incorporates the whole idea of MK Ultra and other kind of mind control programs. So what we know so far is that we have this unstable solution that has been studied for quite some time and seems to be of particular interest to the psychiatric community. We know that this is an unstable compound, so how you ship it, how you oxidize it, how you handle it in general seems to be of high importance, and I imagine it's probably also very expensive to deal with. We also know that this can come from inorganic sources or organic sources, but as I just showed you on Alibaba, the organic sources seem to be much more expensive, meaning much more pure, probably much more potent, and for those who can afford it, much more in demand. But we also know that the purer the source, the closer to the human that it gets, and we also know that there's a pretty gnarly extraction process that has a lot to do with sexual abuse and pain and fear and a lot of really, really scary things that happen to be produced in the pineal gland, which just so happens to be a memory valve. And that's something that I imagine that the psychiatric community also is very interested in. We also know that it seems like there is a popularity for subjects who have higher concentrations of melanin, darker skinned people Incidentally, these are the same kinds of communities that have high rates of human trafficking victims. For those who ingest this, there is a hallucinogenic type high. There's all sorts of kinds of fringe benefits, if you will, including the benefit of ingesting melatonin and melanin, which I imagine could help keep your skin looking young, but also can help protect against things like DNA degradation and probably some other effects not related to the high itself. But we do know that it creates a high. But we also know that this can cause schizophrenia and has been used to treat schizophrenics, oddly enough, but also seems to have created schizophrenics, and I imagine that's also of note to the psychiatric community. Going back to the original study from Abram Hoffer, there was one particular psychiatrist that caught my attention, who in 1957 contributed some of his own racing pigeons to these studies on the effect of adrenochrome and adrenoleukin on the behavior of various animals, in this particular case, these racing pigeons. That doctor's name was Dr. H. Wojcicki, and that name caught my attention, likely like it just caught yours, which led me to think, is this Dr. H. Wojcicki related to our powerful tech family, Anne, Susan, Janet, Stanley, and Esther? Well, I could not find any of that information at all. As a matter of fact, the only thing I've been able to find so far on Dr. H. Wojcicki were leading me right back to this very same study. So as of now, I'm going to chalk that up to a coincidence. But while I'm at it, let me share you a couple other coincidences by talking a little bit about the Wojcicki family. And here you see part of them. In the red dress is Esther Wojcicki. She is an educator and a bit of a scientist herself. She also mentored Steve Jobs' daughter when she was younger. Stanley is on the right, and he is a physics professor. So as you can see, there's a lot of bright minds in this family. But there's actually three sisters, and here they are. On the left is Anne Wojcicki, who runs a human genome project that helps basically harvest your DNA and tell you kinds of diseases that you may be predisposed to. I wonder if that's relevant. Yes, Anne Wojcicki, that company, 23, there's that pesky 23, and me, 23andMe. Now, in the center is the lesser talked about Janet Wojcicki, but she's a bright woman too, anthropologist, epidemiologist. I wonder if that's relevant. But lesser known fact about her is that she is also an associate professor in pediatrics. And then, of course, on the right, you have Susan Wojcicki, who runs YouTube. And of course, YouTube's parent company is Google. One of the co-founders of Google is Sergey Brin, who used to be married to Anne Wojcicki. Sergey Brin, along with Larry Page, started Google out of Susan Wojcicki's garage. Some of the software that we are seeing that is tracking a lot of these coronavirus statistics were developed at least in part by Larry Page, or at least people that were working with Larry Page. And I should probably note that their grandfather, Franciszek Wojcicki, was a Polish MP back in the day, I believe around the 1947. So a lot of bright minds in this Wojcicki family, but I'm sure it's probably just coincidental. It's probably also just coincidental that the name of Google's new graphics processing unit is named Adreno. And of course their search engine is named Chrome. Probably just coincidence. Susan is also married to a Google exec named Dennis Troper, who is a pretty successful guy in his own right, heading up the Wear OS program and Google Fiber, which is essentially wearable tech, which is also wearable spyware. So at this stage in the game, I think we've established that adrenochrome is indeed a real substance. It's been created, harvested, developed, enhanced, tested, studied, sold, and shipped for quite some time. We also know that there's kind of a wide market range for this, ranging on the fairly expensive to the extremely expensive, depending on the purity. We also know that the purity has to do with the source, and the most pure comes from the human source. This has all been established and should no longer be considered a conspiracy theory. What the question is now, is adrenochrome truly being used for nefarious purposes? Well, we can only go off suggestion, and we have a lot of suggestion, but the fact of the matter is that we don't really have a whole lot of case study to show for it with specific references to adrenochrome. Let me take you now over here to adrenochrome.net, and I want to point out right off the bat that this is a very well developed website, although the content is very disturbing and dark. Whoever made this website put some good time into it. It's well written, it's well developed, it's incredibly intuitive, and it just functions well, which suggests to me that a lot of money was put into this website. But as you can see, it is entitled Adrenochrome, and they're referring to this ADC black paper, which is essentially, looks to me like a decentralized sort of cryptocurrency used to purchase the compound adrenochrome. Let me highlight this right here. On the second paragraph, the adrenochrome compound is synthesized by the oxidation of adrenaline sourced from the blood of human children. Adrenochrome is the purest product on the market, harvested under strictly regulated conditions from our international supply chain of child donors. The inherent difficulty of the propagation and extraction of adrenochrome has long made it a highly exclusive product in the province of vampiric elites. The Adrenochrome Foundation intends to enlarge the market capitalization of adrenochrome. So they are looking to branch out with their business. In the future, adrenochrome will be available exclusively from www.adrenochrome.com. In order to purchase adrenochrome, customers will need ADC coin, which can be purchased at a fixed price during our initial coin offering. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, not only are they selling adrenochrome, they're telling you where it comes from, and they're telling you that soon it will be available exclusively, which means they have every intention of cornering this market, not just expanding it. So initially my thought was this must be coming from very, very big money, because when you have very, very big money, you're not that interested in just making money. You're interested in consolidation of power, and it looks like they're trying to establish that right off the bat. Now, there are some provisions here, and I think it's very important to note this is illegal in the USA. Do not purchase or attempt to purchase adrenochrome tokens. That should go without saying, and this channel no way endorses this behavior. This also does not include Hong Kong, Macau, Taiwan. There were actually a ton of provisions, including provisions for Iran, Korea, North Korea, so on and so forth. But all of this leads me to my next question. Is the adrenochrome being produced on adrenochrome.net the same as the adrenochrome that we're seeing being sold on Alibaba? Because Alibaba seems to be doing it legally. Adrenochrome.net seems to have some very specific provisions. Is this a different kind of adrenochrome, a legal adrenochrome versus an illegal adrenochrome? And if so, what is the difference in the harvesting methods? And if there is no difference in the harvesting methods, why is it not legal? And if it's not legal, why is it being sold on Alibaba.com? So I think it's important to note that it could very well be possible legal on Alibaba, not so much on adrenochrome.net, and it may vary from country to country. But either way, I think it's a very important question to ask. Unless, of course, all of these provisions are exactly what make it legal for adrenochrome.net, which to me is the scariest possibility of all. Under the promo section of adrenochrome.net, we see this video here, Adrenochrome ADC, and the link will take you to a YouTube page if you want to watch it in its entirety. We are not going to watch the video, but we are going to look at some of the screenshots from the video. I don't want to play it for you. I want you to be able to choose it for yourself if you want to see it. But like the website, the video is highly produced. As a matter of fact, the sound is pristine. The graphics and the visuals are really, really well done. Unfortunately, the content is incredibly dark and incredibly creepy, as well as mesmerizing, which is why we are not going to play it. But again, this lends to my theory that a lot of money was put into the production of these visuals. As you can see in the first screenshot right here, they're advertising it as discreet. And of course, they're using a cryptocurrency, and that's exactly what they're suggesting. And the next one right here, decentral, meaning this could be bought all over the world, and it would be very, very difficult to trace, which makes this an incredibly difficult problem to solve. Then you see something very curious here. It says viral. As a matter of fact, a lot of these visuals suggest some sort of virus constantly spreading, which of course lends into our current topic, doesn't it? Now the next screenshot says high velocity. And I'm assuming they're talking about the quality of the adrenochrome, whether it is the oxidation rate or how quickly it functions in your system. I'm not really sure. It could even be related to the actual frequency of the material, depending on its purity too. But either way, high speed. And then of course we see right here, tracking, huh? We're talking about tracking, almost like we're tracking people around the world, almost like we're tracking coronavirus around the world. We're doing a lot of tracking these days. Now in the opening sequence, we see this here, which appears to be kind of a ruby gemstone or whatnot, but I would offer up that this very well could just be referring to the crystalline adrenochrome that we read about earlier. And now we see a couple of other screenshots here showing it in liquid form, and you can see that they have sort of this snake fashion that we've seen before that suggests a lot of symbolism in itself. Now we see what seems to be some sort of cell activity going on, very disturbing stuff, but not nearly as disturbing as this, where they refer to the sourcing. And of course, I don't think I need to tell you what the symbolism is there. Harvesting and trafficking. And yet for me, I think the most disturbing part that I saw about the site was this right here, the offer to invest now, not to buy, not to use their product, not to try for 30 days, but to invest, to actually become a part of this growing company that eventually plans to become exclusive. So having said all that, is this adrenochrome.net simply just a fake website set up to troll researchers like you and me? Well, I don't think we'd be very good researchers if we didn't acknowledge the possibility of that. However, I want to make 3 points. Number one, the website design, like I already pointed out. Not only is this very well done, but it's very intuitive. Like I said, very intuitive, meaning that it gets right to the point. They don't blast you with a bunch of flash graphics and a bunch of bells and whistles. They get right to the point, and they do a very good job of doing it. Number two, like I pointed out in the video, the graphics in the video, the sound, the production. This was meant to look as beautiful and as appealing as it could for people who would be interested in this product. And then number three would be their terms and conditions. I'm slowly going to scroll, and I want to show you simply that they have covered all the possible bases that I could imagine. It appears that they've had legal representation and that they're very, very well versed in international law. And you will see as I start to pick this up that this goes on and on and on and on and on and on. I think you get the idea. They are covering all of their bases. So if indeed this was set up to troll, they sure did a good job of spending a lot of money, effort, time, and apparently legal counseling in order to do the job. And if that's simply just to make people like me look stupid, then they most certainly achieved it. But at what cost? And at what gain? Now I want to illustrate a few examples of how Hollywood and the film industry has been introducing us to ideas and concepts such as adrenochrome usage gradually over the years. This could be applied to all kinds of topics, not just adrenochrome usage, but in this particular video, that's what we're looking for. Now, we've long known that print, radio, television, and of course the film industry and music industry has long been using the power of suggestion to sway us on things like social concepts, political concepts, even from selling us soap to homes to fashion. So this is really no surprise, and of course the film industry is rife with suggestive media and symbolism, as we know. In particular, with the film industry, a lot of directors will pride themselves on their placement of what I call Easter eggs. And as you know, Easter eggs are hidden. You have to look for them. But Easter eggs are also brightly colored, meaning that you'll find them just as long as you know what to look for. And this is done a ton in this film right here, The Dark Crystal from 1982, Jim Henson and Frank Oz. And we're not going to go through this entire plot because this is really an epic tale, and it spun off into a franchise. It's become quite a big thing over the years, and of course they've remade it over the years too. But this film takes place on the planet Thra, and Thra comes from Mithra, who is also rife with symbolism. You can make a whole video on the character of Mithra, right? And this planet has 3 suns: the Great Sun, the Dying Sun, and of course one more symbol that you are familiar with already, the Rose Sun. Now, this crystal of truth harnesses the force of nature and all the suns and all this. We're not going to get into the whole plot, but this crystal breaks off into a shard. And you have this race of what we call Urskeks that are trying to go after this crystal, and they break off into two races, which is a little bit schizophrenic, right? And of course, you have this sort of yin-yang nature of it. You have the good race and you have the evil race. Now, they're not the only two races in the film, but these are the ones that were really involved with the crystal. And one is actually drawing their energy from the crystal, which has a lot of reference to the crystallized adrenochrome. Now, as this starts to not pan out for them in the film, I don't want to give away the film, of course, they start to use another race of what they call gelflings, and they actually will drain their life essence there. And as you can see, that's how it looks right there, and it drips into this little vial. Well, that vial certainly looks familiar, doesn't it? And here is a promo of just that 100% organic gelfling essence. And of course, you see symbolism all over that. And look at that odd looking vial that he's holding. Anti-aging, new elixir. Sound familiar? Well, I think it should. And if you saw the opening sequence, you saw the process of this gelfling being drained of its essence, very much like the process we've been talking about in the handling of adrenochrome. And like I mentioned earlier, there's a ton of symbolism in this film. You will see it all throughout, especially on the characters' outfits and on the set pieces. All kinds of spirals that would suggest all kinds of mind control and pedophilia. And of course, that life essence was drained into a very familiar looking vial. Does that look familiar to you? Another example could be from the 1965 science fiction novel Dune, which of course later was made into a wildly successful movie franchise itself. And you may remember in this film the planet Arrakis, which is this really sparsely populated desert wasteland, right? And the only place in the universe that houses this spice melange. And of course, melange means mixture, but incongruous materials, meaning it's a mixture of things that don't really go together. But again, we see this theme of this far off place, a very inhospitable place that just so happens to house the rarest of essences or elixirs or spices or whatever you like. And again, this is a drug that extends their life. It allows their mental capacity to expand. And of course, in the story Dune, this actually allows for space navigation because they are traveling through dimensions. So again, we see hallucinogenic and life-extending suggestions. It's probably also coincidence that in the movie the planet is called Arrakis, which sounds a lot like Iraq, and they were going to war with a warlord named Shaddam, which sounds a lot like Saddam, and they were known as the Zenzuni Wanderers, which sounds oddly like Sunni, but those are just coincidences. Now let's have a look at a few screenshots from the 2011 film Limitless, starring Bradley Cooper, Abby Cornish, and Robert De Niro. And this is based off an Alan Glenn novel from 2001 entitled The Dark Fields. And this gives us a slightly different take through the lens of the business world, but we see a lot of the same occurring themes. And in this film, NZT48 is actually offered to us as a pill. We start off the film with a very typical Hollywood theme, struggling author who is struggling in all aspects of his life, from his relationships to his health to his finances, until he stumbles upon this drug NZT48, which allows him to utilize more of his brain. And through this, he becomes more clever and he finds ways to invest, and he makes millions of dollars, and success ensues. And of course, so do the hijinks. Now, in this scene, we see his character being confronted by another powerful businessman who is aware of his secret, played by Robert De Niro. Both of them are aware of this drug and its uses. But what I want to point your attention to is what's on the wall. You see the word fast and another word there that begins with the letter F, and we never really quite get a grasp on what that says there. But I think what they're pointing our attention to is the letters FF. Now, we've seen this as of recent a lot lately all over online. A lot of people been talking about these references, celebrities referencing the letters FF, which many believe is referencing the Fe2 ferrous iron chemical element, which a lot of people believe would be a sign of adrenochrome usage. Now, whether or not that's true, what we do see is the constant referencing to that wall and the letters FF behind it. Now, here we see Robert De Niro mentioning about the drug that they'll never officially exist, meaning that it will always be around, but they're never actually going to cop to the production, manufacture, sale, and of course taking of this substance, very much like something else we've been talking about. And like I just said, although in the film we see this offered up to us as a pill, there's a very key scene here where you'll see Cooper's character on the left and another character on the right. He realizes that the character on the right has this drug in his system, and he decides to ingest the blood that is coming out of his system in order to get this NZT48 into his. As like a lot of these symptoms that we've seen in these adrenochrome usage studies, this seems to create a very severe withdrawal symptom. And here you can sort of see the psychotropic nature of how they're trying to present the film. And there's one more key thing that I want to show you right here, where he's actually scrambling to put away some of this drug, and you see the site of the pizza box where it clearly says, "I love pizza." More suggestive activity or just a coincidence? You tell me. Now I want to turn your attention to the story of The Little Prince, which of course is a very old story published in 1943 by Count Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, and this has been adapted many times. Many of them I think are very innocent adaptations, but again we have another story taking place in the stranded desert where we have an aviator who runs into a little prince after crashing his plane. Now we're not going to go through the entire story here, but there are some interesting themes, and I particularly want to direct your attention to the 1974 film by Stanley Donen, as I think there are a lot more innocent tellings of this story. This film seems to have a lot of suggestive behavior. In particular, you have a young boy that is constantly encountering full-grown adults, which is not a very innocent theme at all. And one of those scenes features Bob Fosse as the insidious snake, which incidentally inspired a lot of the dance moves later for Michael Jackson himself. But one of the scenes features Gene Wilder as the fox, and there's some very curious behavior going on, whereas the character of the fox is encouraging this young boy to tame him. And here is one of the lines from the movie: "You become responsible forever for what you have tamed, and it is the time you have devoted to your rose that makes your rose so important." So again, we see this rose symbolism, which seems to be suggesting some sort of taming or acquisition or ownership of another.
Because you wasted so much time on me, you made me feel very important.
But now I feel sort of responsible for you.
I should have warned you that would happen. You always feel responsible for what you've tamed.
The moment he said that, I understood everything. He wasn't like all the other foxes in the world anymore. I tamed him, and now he was unique, at least to me. And my flower was like all those other flowers, because I had fetched her a screen and put a glass bowl over her at night and listened when she grumbled, and now she was my rose, and I was responsible for her, and I had to go back and take care of her.
Now let's have a look at the 2001 computer animated film Monsters, Inc. This features John Goodman and Billy Crystal as the main characters, who are monsters, Sully and Wazowski. This was produced by Pixar Animation and distributed by Walt Disney Pictures, which specializes in children's films. Now, this story takes place in the fictional monster city of Monstropolis, and in order to power this city, they require the energy of children. And knowing what you know now, you can draw your own correlations. But in particular, they generate power by scaring human children. And that's what Sully and Wazowski do. They go through portals and they enter bedrooms of children and they scare these children. And of course, their company has all kinds of files on these children. Very much like a lot of our tracking centers do in our world. And here you see the CEO of Monsters Inc., Henry J. Waternoose. He is holding a vessel or a vial full of the freshly extracted Scream. So I think you can see where we're going with this already. Now, here we see an opening shot of a child's bedroom, and big thanks to Enter the Stars Reloaded on YouTube, who did a video dedicated to this movie entitled Adrenochrome Harvested Humanity, the documentary. And here we have some highlighted yellow arrows from those videos. So thank you very much to Enter the Stars Reloaded. In this scene, you see a child's bedroom. You can see the Masonic checkered carpet nearby the bed, and it's a little bit faint in this picture, but you can see a soccer ball underneath the bed. And this soccer ball seems to be a very recurring theme throughout not just this film, but a lot of children's movies. Now here we see it again, and you can see the monster with the glowing red eyes right next to it. And in this scene, a monster comes to scare the child, and it kind of goes wrong, and they have a little comedic scene, and you see right here the monster tripping over the soccer ball. Now that soccer ball bounces off the wall and comes straight at the camera. And here in this scene, you see the child Boo, who is a main character, dressed up as a monster. And where the yellow arrow is, you see a hamper upside down with a soccer ball trapped inside. Now you see it on its side, and it's showcased again. So you can see that it seems like they're wanting to draw your attention to this soccer ball, or they're just not being very creative in their background. We see it again here in a random scene walking down the street with a background character on the stoop. And we see it again here with the character of Sully about to scare a child, and once again the soccer ball is placed under the bed. Now there are a lot of eerie themes in this video, but some of them that I want to point out are the involvement of agencies like child protective agencies, which sometimes can be just as nefarious as others. Now I'm not saying that's the entire agency, but oftentimes we find that a lot of the creeps are going to go into jobs where they can get access to children. And you see here the CEO actually stating that he was kidnapping children, which is what happens with this main character, Boo. She falls through the portal, goes into the monster world, and essentially is kidnapped, which was a big no-no for either one of these worlds. And this CEO is flat out saying, I will kidnap as many children as needed to keep this agency from dying. He doesn't say from folding, he says from dying. And here you see another monster that was coming out of the opening scene back out of the portal, and they had fallen on some jacks, which also have a lot of different kinds of representations in itself, to sheep bones, which were originally what jacks came from. I don't want to go way into that, but there are freshly extracted Screams in that vessel too, and he realizes that he forgot the soccer ball. Now you see it again with Wazowski. You see the soccer ball on the left, and you see the soccer ball on the right. Oddly enough, the soccer team is known as the Bandits, as if they were stealing something. Now we see something very curious in Boo's bedroom. She is poking out from under the bed, and I want to point out that the bedpost is slightly shaped like a pine cone. However, it is not a pine cone. So remember that. It's shaped like a pine cone, but it is not a pine cone. However, if you look at the blocks next to her, you can see that it spells out Pineal. Now we see another scene that I think is really, really crucial that many people might have missed. You see Sully and Wazowski walking down the street, and another character greets them, and they are passing a fine art gallery. Now, if you've been following my channel for long enough, you'll know that we have included the world of fine art in its relationship with human trafficking. So much of this art is distributed all over the world, which means it's shipped all over the world. Not to mention, many of these art museums have tunnel networks underneath, but not just tunnel networks, climate-controlled tunnel networks, just in case you need to store any unstable liquids or children. And have you ever asked yourself, why are all these people spending millions and millions of dollars for paintings that look like they were painted by 6-year-old kids? Is the fine art really the fine art, or is something else being referred to as fine art? Well, we see an allusion to this when you see this monster drop through the grate, suggesting that in the fine art world, there's something underground. Now you see another scene in the bedroom where you see pizza boxes in the bedroom. I don't think I need to tell you what the pizza means. But here again, we are back in Boo's bedroom, and this time you'll notice, thanks again to Enter the Stars Reloaded, that the bedpost is a pine cone, referring to the pineal gland. What's extracted from the pineal gland? Adrenochrome. And finally, we see another tracking system, and it almost looks like a child-like tracking system, very much like we've been watching the Corona tracking system, right? And oddly enough, look at those top corners, F and F. I'm sure that's just coincidental. So there's a lot I could go into, but I want to keep moving forward. But I do want to point out that in this movie, if you look at it from a different angle, you may be able to see that the monsters we see as our protagonists actually seem to be the antagonists. After all, they did kidnap a child. The CEO of the company admitted to stealing children. And one curious character that ties it all together is the character of Roz. And if you've seen the movie, you'll know that Roz is suspicious of these gentlemen, and she has every good reason to. She used to do their job, but she's always watching them. As a matter of fact, she launches an investigation against them. So is it possible that Roz was actually leading an investigation into the theft of children, and we were watching the movie completely backwards? You tell me. But at the end of the movie, Roz reveals that she had been investigating the two characters for 2.5 years, and even she was surprised that it led all the way up to the top, being the CEO Waternoose, who had already admitted to kidnapping children. Not to mention the reason why Roz was so suspicious the entire movie of the little one-eyed green character Wazowski was because he never filed his paperwork, suggesting he didn't want something to be official. Just saying, it's probably also just coincidence that Roz sounds a lot like Rose. So it appears that the symbolism of the soccer ball has some importance, and we will discuss that in a little bit. But right now I'd like to turn your attention back to another symbol, that of the rose, which we were already discussing. In particular, the pink rose. Now, if you'll remember in part 1, we mentioned that one of the purest forms of adrenaline comes in a pink solution. So is this a nod to that? Well, not really sure, but I'd like to show you some more examples that would buttress that point. Two great examples come from the author Ira Levin, who authored both Rosemary's Baby and the Stepford Wives. Both of these films have some very, very similar themes. The 1968 horror film adaptation of Rosemary's Baby was directed by Roman Polanski, who later fled the country to avoid sentencing for rape. But I want to turn you on to one sequence from the film in which the lead character, Rosemary, and Guy Woodhouse are having dinner with Hutch, who is the tenant of the Bramford, which is the building that has a very sordid, dark, and mysterious history. He is serving them a leg of lamb. And the lamb appears to have a lot of symbolism on its own as he serves it up to them, along with some red wine, while telling them some dark stories regarding the building. In particular, a story about the Trench sisters, who were cannibals and cooked and ate several young children. He goes on to talk about witchcraft and another tenant that had conjured the devil, and they're asking some questions, and then the lead character compliments him on the lamb. Note his gesture and his response.
Terrific.
The house?
The lamb.
Oh, they called it Black Bramford.
But Hutch, awful things happen in every apartment house.
This house has a high incidence of unpleasant happenings. In '59, a dead infant was found wrapped in newspaper in the basement.
You really roused my appetite.
Have some more wine.
Throughout this very dark movie, the character of Rosemary undergoes a very deep, dark ordeal and transforms before our very eyes. As a matter of fact, we see her cut her locks, which is very indicative of a lot of celebrity behavior, and it is very representative of MK Ultra mind control behavior, undergoing this transformation, which is a big part of why the MK Ultra is often represented by a butterfly, which undergoes its own sort of transformation. Now, with the Stepford Wives, there were two movies made, one in 1975. You see a screenshot right here with an immediate allusion to the pink rose. And this is a satirical thriller, also by Ira Levin. And this features a young mother and photographer who ends up moving to a new neighborhood, only to find out that the neighbors' wives aren't quite what they seem. And although this is satire and they turn out to be sort of these robots, there are a lot of MK Ultra behaviors and habits in this film. This was even turned into a television show, and you will see non-stop references to particular pink roses, but flowers all over. Many of the wives are often wearing flowered dresses, which again goes back to my reference of the ownership. And here is one particular actress who was featured in the 2004 remake. You know her as Bette Midler, and she is wearing a pink rose. She was also in a 1979 film where she played a rock star entitled The Rose. Probably coincidence. And like I said, the roses feature very prominently in this movie, virtually in every shot of the film, whether they be red roses, pink roses. Now, the husbands are in their own little men's club, and it's sort of symbolic of the secret societies that we know of. The head of this men's club is a former Disney engineer who evidently creates these lifelike robots, which also suggests a lot of connection to MK Ultra and the Disney world. We've known for quite some years that Disney has had a lot of problems with child sex abuse arrests, both at their parks and throughout their film industry and their music executives. But I think one of the best illustrations of how this process may work is the 2017 horror film Get Out. This was written and directed by Jordan Peele, who is one half of the comic duo Key and Peele. And this is a bit of a dark turn for him. I thought it was very interesting that in an interview he was talking about why he made this film. And he mentioned that he wanted to make something that represented something he was personally afraid of happening to him. And like Rosemary's Baby and the Stepford Wives, this movie features prominently a photographer in the main character, Chris Washington, who is a young black man dating a young white woman named Rose Armitage. And in the opening of the movie, there is a little trepidation about meeting the parents, wondering if they are going to accept this young black man into their household. And they live in upstate New York. Her father is a neurosurgeon and her mother is a hypnotherapist, which later proves to be relevant in the movie. Now, in the beginning of the movie, the two are driving upstate to meet the family when their car strikes a deer that is jumping across the road. And this sets off a series of symbolic events for the main character of Chris and his relationship with this deer that he sees mounted on a wall later on throughout the movie. And the deer itself even seems to undergo a transformation. This appears to have some MK Ultra references as well as satanic symbolism, being that Y-shaped Baphomet head that we see a lot in satanic symbolism, and that also proves relevant later on in the movie. But they get to the house, they meet the family, and the family throws a party involving a lot of different guests. All of these guests seem to take a particular interest with Chris, even to the point of ogling him like a piece of meat. Now, I want to highlight that throughout this scene, we see, really throughout the movie, we see a lot of accents of blood red. There seems to be one in almost every shot. I also want to mention that the good characters, whether it be Chris or related characters that we later find out to be good, they all tend to be wearing blue. But here is another example of just that. You can see it on scarves and pocket squares and bottles and roses. And then we have this couple that actually mentions that being black is in fashion, and neither of them have a red accent. They're all very, very black. And I'd also like to draw your attention to the lady's very curious looking necklace, which almost looks like the atomic structure of adrenochrome. Now, Chris finally meets another young black man by the name of Logan King, who behaves very interestingly himself. And he turns around, you can see that he is also wearing that blue accent color. Oddly enough, he is met by his wife, who shows up very shortly. Yes, his wife. And she appears to do some sort of triggering event where she shakes a bit of keys and then sticks this handkerchief in his pocket, to where this man, Logan, ends up kind of acting a little bit more normal. Well, this later changes throughout the party when Chris tries to take a picture of this guy, Logan, and the camera flash seems to trigger Logan, whether it's back into reality or out of it, but it appears to be back into reality where he actually warns Chris to get away and to leave as fast as he can. So Logan freaks out for a little bit and goes away with Rose's mother for a few minutes of therapy and returns looking more quote-unquote normal. Meanwhile, Rose's father is auctioning off a picture of Chris to the rest of the party. And of course, this is very symbolic of the slave trade of old, but is also a reference to the current human trafficking situation. Now, the man who ends up buying this is Jim Hudson. He is a blind art dealer. Yes, I said art dealer. So we're talking once again about the art trade. And of course, he's not just there to buy the picture. He's there to buy something much more sinister. Now, we see a lot of this racial symbolism throughout the movie as the house staff is all black. But of course, there is a much more sinister reason than just racism. As a matter of fact, what's really curious about this movie is that it really highlights the hypocrisy of the middle-class white liberal. But here you can see one of the characters, Georgina. She is wearing a pink rose, and she's under a very similar mind control, which seems to be propagated by the mother, who ends up hypnotizing Chris using this technique, using her china, the way she stirs her tea. And this is originally offered up to Chris to help him quit smoking, but ends up sending him to what's known as the sunken place, where he ends up feeling very, very helpless and going to this place where he can't control. And that's where we really start to see the mind control. You can see him feeling trapped, strapped to a chair there. You see the symbolism of the two pillars. There's a lot going on here, and this is where he finds out how dark it really, really is, where his girlfriend Rose is actually part of a cult known as Coagula, which I'm sure is just coincidence. And he learns about this situation in a very telling scene where he meets the blind art dealer, who explains to him through a television that they are about to undergo a brain transplant surgery. Essentially, this man wants to enter Chris's body to use him for his eyes. Now, there are a lot of other clients that want to use these black people for different things, particularly their strength or their youth. But of course, we see a lot of these side references to things like adrenochrome. Now, I want you to take a listen to this very telling part of the scene.
Why black people? Who knows? People want to change. Some people want to be stronger, faster, cooler.
Black is in fashion.
But please don't lump me in with that. You know, I could give a shit what color you are. No. What I want is deeper. I want your eye, man. I want those things you see through.
So there's a couple of reasons why I'm spending all this time and effort calling attention to a few of these symbols. Not because every time you see a pink flower that means that there's something up, but to show you that there's a lot of consistency in the symbolism used in our art, our visual and audio media. And when you're able to see some of these symbols, you might be able to make more informed decisions as to whether or not you think they're warning signs. Now, we do seem to have some sort of understanding that this rose, particularly this pink rose, has some sort of representation to ownership of someone, and likely could be suggesting the color of blood or maybe even the pink hue of adrenochrome. We don't really know, but what we do know is that the symbolism is everywhere. And I suppose that if you are needing flowers, you would want to contact a florist. Well, one of the biggest stars on the planet has one of the best florists in the world. Says Ellen DeGeneres, it's a great day to be Oprah's florist. This was a tweet from December 12, 2019. And behind them, you see an elaborate set of flowers. Here's another one from October 5th, 2018 from Bloomberg. Any publicist or agent would be jealous of this florist's clients, which include the Kardashians and Oprah, to name a few. Well, I suppose that if you were jealous, or if everybody was vying for Oprah's attention, it would be easy for her to get flowers at any time. Unfortunately, on February 25th, she struggled. I tried to send flowers to celebrate you, Gloria Steinem, on this, your 86. All the florists I know are closed, so sending love and blessings instead. Happy birthday, say to you? Well, one quick search on Amazon would show you that that wouldn't have been the case. So what was Oprah struggling with? After all, any publicist or agent would be jealous of this florist clients. Well, knowing what you know now, I'd like you to take a look at this recent clip from Madonna's infamous Quarantine Diaries.
When the virus starts hitting the people you know and love and affecting friends, and it's no longer a statistic. I watched the last rose petals go down the drain, and yes, I'm lucky I have a friend who is a florist, but even she has given me the last of her roses. As I watched them stop up the drain, and I listened to Brian Eno's new record called Rose Quartz, I thought to myself, life is so precious.
Life is precious, she says, as she takes a drink. Well, life is indeed precious, and it seems to be reminding a lot of these celebrities during coronavirus time. Comedian Kathy Griffin had a little health scare, if you will. She was held in a separate urgent care facility after showing unbearably painful symptoms, but they couldn't test her for coronavirus, even though she was in an isolation ward. Interesting. Well, she had an oxygen mask on, but as you can see in the right picture, the oxygen isn't hooked up. Okay. Well, she got some flowers, roses. Imagine that. From the Kardashians. They had the same florist as Oprah. We just heard about that. She got white flowers and some clovers. And she's not the only one tweeting about flowers. Sharon Stone, Sanjay Gupta. You've got Maria Shriver holding this beautiful bouquet of pink roses. Except she called them green. Well, these roses and flowers seem to be very important to all these celebrities at a time like this, and you may even remember a certain president of the United States surrounding himself in them. Now I want to turn your attention to episode 7 of Madonna's Quarantine Diaries, where I found an interesting plot twist. In it, she is reading a letter from artist Keith Haring, who was a pop icon in the 1980s, thanks largely in part to A, Madonna's promotion, but B, the symbol you are looking at right there, known as Radiant Baby. This featured prominently in a lot of Haring's artwork and a lot of variations on the same theme. Now, Haring was a part of the Jesus movement back in the 60s, and I'm referring to the evangelical movement, and he credits a lot of his artwork to inspiration from that movement. But as you can see here, it is also taken a darker twist as time went on. But what I found very interesting was that he died in 1990 of AIDS-related complications, which got me thinking to how much the AIDS and HIV research has been getting some renewed interest in relation to coronavirus research. But Keith Haring still has a foundation which offers financial assistance to underprivileged children and also to AIDS research. And it still gets a lot of money from some big players such as the Smithsonian, the Mapplethorpe Haring Intervention Model. I was always suspicious of that guy. And what I found really interesting here was multiple, and I mean multiple branches of Planned Parenthood. As a matter of fact, Planned Parenthood largely involved in the donation process of the Keith Haring Foundation, Mount Sinai, Arthur Ashe, Guggenheim, Lincoln Center. So some really, really big players. And one in particular, which is the Whitney Museum, which features prominently in another video I'm going to suggest to you in just a moment. The Whitney Museum also features a retrospective from another artist known as Jean-Michel Basquiat, whose artwork has been showing up in some of Ellen DeGeneres' home videos that she's recently posted on Twitter and Instagram and the likes. He's an interesting character as well, as he is from Haitian and Puerto Rican descent. His mother was in and out of mental asylums, so he sort of fits a profile that we are talking about. But both of these artists receive a ton of money from the Whitney Museum. They are also close friends, and they were close friends of Madonna. So is it possible that the appearance of this artwork in some of these celebrity videos are referencing to some sort of exchange, some sort of support to the artwork itself, or maybe even the foundation that supports these artists? Well, it's hard to say, but I think I've shown over the months in a series of videos that all of these steps seem very possible and even logical. What I can tell you with a great degree of certainty is this: At a time where we are experiencing this pandemic, it seems to me like these celebrities who have all the money in the world seem to want to focus their attention on raising money for groups that benefit China, the World Health Organization, and organizations that are researching vaccines, which seem to be a lot more dangerous than the cure. At the same time, it seems like the world of fine art is very important to them, like the grant we just saw, the massive grant that was granted to the Kennedy Center. So is it just so important to them that they want to preserve these fine pieces of art like Radiant Baby? Or is it possible that it's the structures and what's underneath those structures, those climate-controlled structures that are so important to these celebrities and their way of life? At this point, I want to refer you back to a few of my older videos for a bit of renewed perspective. The first one being from July 17th, 2019, entitled, What the Frick is Going On? We were in New York City, and we were talking about the Frick Museum, which is directly across the street from Jeffrey Epstein's Fifth Avenue mansion. This is a very expensive piece of real estate and has a very sordid history, and was oddly enough gifted to Epstein by CEO of Victoria's Secret and L Brands, Les Wexner. This also goes into the Frick family history, as well as a lot of other influential New York families, featuring the Schiff family and also the Vanderbilts, who were friends of the Fricks and actually rented them their first location. That first location is now a Victoria's Secret. We talk a lot about the art trade, the medical industry, and how a lot of this money that gets donated to different foundations seem to have the same relations and the same sources. It seems that the people that are interested in art are also interested in medical and biotech kinds of sciences. We also explore the underground world with the tunnels, the Q train, Central Park, human trafficking, and a lot of those eerie stories, including the story of Alice in Wonderland and the famed statue there in Central Park, which recently had a bomb attempt. The follow-up video to that is entitled Child Mind, from the 22nd of July, and we are talking about the Child Mind Institute, their relationship with people like Hillary Clinton, Ghislaine Maxwell, and we even talk a bit about the Whitney Museum. So please check that out. The next video is entitled Detroit Evergreen, from January 6, 2020. And we were talking about this particular neighborhood in Detroit where there was a nearby underground missile base, as well as a few different sanitariums, a tunnel network, and a couple of odd explosions. But we also sort of lay out the entire map in sort of a template form, showing how much of the low-income community is led into the process of human trafficking. So please check these videos out. Hopefully some of what we talked about today will give you a little bit new perspective on these videos. Now I want to take you back to a topic that we talked about in part 1, which was the subject of these epinephrine auto-injectors, or EpiPens, in particular their relationship with Melanin Pharmaceuticals, who has this EpiPen for Schools program in which they sell these devices to schools at a discount, but these schools and programs are not allowed to purchase outside of these companies. We also know that epinephrine, when it is oxidized, will turn into adrenochrome, so that would likely suggest that these auto-injectors could be little auto-injectors for adrenochrome if oxidized or expired. Now, the subject of the expiration seems to be a bit nebulous. We have a lot of different definitions of when these expiration dates were, and that was part of the story we talked about in part 1, but it seems like a lot of these schools ended up having all these surplus of these auto-injectors, which I suppose would be very handy. Now, I got a lot of different feedback. There was a lot of feedback from people in the medical and health care industries that had a lot of different stories as to what happens with these expired auto-injectors. Some people said that they were done, they were disposed with, they just basically disposed them in the sink or something like that. There were other ones which they collected, and it appears that some places even had a buyback program with their supplier. But either way, we know that there was some sort of surplus racket going on here, and there were a lot of people thinking that antitrust laws were violated. Well, oddly enough, the company of Melanin has announced that there are some device malfunctions, and this was actually late last year, early this year, being 2020. This is the most recent update from the FDA, and I found this very curious. Reading from the top line here from the 9th, FDA is notifying patients and caregivers that EpiPens are not being recalled at this time. We urge patients and caregivers to use the EpiPens they have on hand and be aware of the potential issues outlined in the statement below. low. Okay, so they were having some problems with failure to properly inject, and it seems like it's more of an equipment malfunction as opposed to the actual substance itself. But what I found very odd is that it seemed like they had a recall in 2017, they had another recall in 2018, but they are not recalling this time, which was actually the opposite of what I expected to find. So it looks like as of the 9th, they are urging consumers to just go ahead and deal with the problems that they are using, but they are not recalling them. So assuming that if there was some sort of shortage, you would imagine there would be a push to recall. And I have no idea if that was the case and maybe it got stifled, or maybe this truly was just simply a malfunction and they don't think it's important enough to recall. But there were a couple of other interesting events that kind of happened right around this time that I also found interesting. Now, I don't want to dox anyone at all, but I do want to mention that before Bernie actually dropped out of the race, there was a super PAC, and it was actually called Beat Bernie 2020. Now, there's not a lot of donor information on this, and I'm not going to go into too much of what I found, and there have been some other reporters who have done some better work online that you can find. And I think the big thing is that nobody wants to dox anyone in particular, but this PAC seems to be very, very mysterious, and there's not a lot of donor info. And as you can see right here, you're looking at part of their FEC form, and you see the address is at 660 North Capitol Street Northwest. Okay, so this would be in Washington, D.C. But I want to point out here, this is from the FEC, Report of Receipts and Disbursements, that the address to Melanin Incorporated is 660 North Capitol Street Northwest. So it's very possible that this Melanin could just be in the same office building as this PAC, and maybe has nothing to do with it. It could be an office building full of a bunch of different offices. This is Suite 600. Like I said, I don't want to go into any doxing, but I found it very curious that it was at least the same office building right around the same time Bernie got himself a little bit of coin. So I wouldn't want to say that Melanin is directly involved, but it is curious. As you can see right here, Melanin does donate to PACs, which is not completely unusual. And I'm sure it's just a coincidence that their current CEO is Heather Bresch, who just so happens to be the daughter of West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin. It's probably also just a coincidence that Bernie Sanders has been highly critical of groups like Melanin, who are basically these generic pharmas who don't really hold the patent. They don't actually invent the medicines. They just buy them up in bulk, and that's how they make so much of their money, which kind of explains their whole deal with the schools and their EpiPens for Schools program. So if we're just going to take this story at face value, it's very possible that this was a simple malfunction, but they didn't find it a big enough deal to actually recall, or this could have been an attempt to create a recall from Melanin and the FDA didn't approve. It's really hard to know, and I could believe it either way. But I do find this very interesting. If you will remember from the beginning of this video, we talked about blood plasma, which is adjusted to optimal conditions of pH, ionic strength, catalysts, etc. Quickly oxidizes epinephrine to adrenochrome. Well, when these EpiPens expire or when they get oxidized, epinephrine becomes adrenochrome, which is why we're looking at it in the first place, right? Oddly enough, we have a lot of our A-list celebrities coming out, especially ones that have tested positive for coronavirus. What are they doing now? Donating blood plasma. From George Stephanopoulos, good news for me and my family. Last week I tested positive for COVID antibodies, confirming I cleared the virus after weeks without symptoms. So keep in mind, I shouldn't say that anybody who just got contracted with coronavirus, but anybody with the antibodies. I've also signed up for a clinical trial to donate my blood plasma and expect to make the donation in the coming weeks. And this is becoming a big deal here. We've seen it with quite a few different people. You see James Dolan, the New York Knicks owner, and of course, a couple that did come out with the coronavirus, Tom Hanks and Rita Wilson. So here we have the usual cast of characters, some of them who had the coronavirus, some of them who did not, all donating blood plasma because they've tested positive for the antibody. And I guess testing for the antibody would be a lot bigger group of people than people who actually test for the virus. But the point is that they want you to donate your blood plasma. We know what blood plasma can do in relation to adrenochrome, or are they really just trying to save lives here? Well, I suppose it's very possible, but it's very unique and interesting that these people are all supporting and doing fundraisers like the One World fundraiser that we just saw online that benefits groups like the World Health Organization, which seems to be very much in bed with the globalist China objective, and groups like Bill Gates, who would much rather see you deal with an expensive vaccine as opposed to, say, a really cheaply produced medicine such as hydroxychloroquine, which would also not benefit big pharma very much at all. So if you're going to donate some blood, we talked about it earlier, you got to put some iron in that body, right? But you don't want too much iron in the body because you can get disease. And I want to talk about one of those diseases. Vampire disease is another term of porphyria. This refers to a certain group of diseases known as porphyrias, which affect either the skin or the nervous system, or oftentimes both. Each type of porphyria is due to deficiency of enzymes needed to create heme. Heme is a component of hemoglobin in red blood cells and in myoglobin, a protein component of some muscles. All right, well, we've talked about heme before. We talked about it in my video from September 5th, 2019, entitled Infinite Chan Impossible Food. And I also want to shout out Amazing Polly, who did a great video in regard to this topic as well. But we were talking about a group like Impossible Foods that makes this meatless Whopper, a lot of meatless products. And one of their big selling points is this artificial creation, or quote unquote artificial creation, of heme. And what we both pointed out in our videos was their odd connection and proximity to Planned Parenthood locations. You can decipher the rest from there. But that is heme, and it's made this big comeback in the media being talked about through these meatless type products. So let's talk about this a little bit. The process of making heme is referred to as heme biosynthetic pathway. Each step of it is controlled by one of the enzymes. If there is any deficiency in any one of the enzymes, the process of creating heme is disturbed, hence resulting to the buildup of porphyrins in the body tissues, hence the name porphyria. Most of the time, this is an inherited disorder, but there is one kind of porphyria that is acquired. This is caused by certain factors besides the abnormality of the genes. The triggers of porphyria are exposure to the sun, menstrual hormones, physical and emotional stress, too much iron in the body, infections, alcohol, smoking, fasting, and chemicals. Okay, so you got to be careful. You don't want too much iron in the body. And I suppose if you are doing any kind of plasma donation or blood donation, you have to be very aware of that. And I suppose if you're going to a reputable organization, that's going to be a lot easier than if you did this somewhere else. Well, oddly enough, there is a medicine that can treat all of this. It's called hydroxychloroquine. So is this call for blood and blood plasma donations simply a humanitarian call to arms to assist the World Health Organization in their fight against the coronavirus and finding a magical vaccine? Or is there something more sinister at play, and maybe this plasma is being used as an oxidation agent for something more sinister? Keep in mind, according to these journals that we've covered and the films that we've looked through, adrenochrome usage can lead to a sickness once you wean off of it, meaning that once you start chronically using something like this, you need to continue using it to stay well. And we see that the ones who seem to be suffering the most are our celebrities, who have grown increasingly dramatic, despondent, and sickly looking. And I think we can all see from their behavior that these people are sick. As always, you decide. In our next episode of The Bite, we will discuss some possible cures, not just for coronavirus, but possibly for some other ailments, including the role of phospholipase A2, which we discussed briefly at the end of part 1. Phospholipase A2 is derived from bee and snake venom. We will also discuss Korea and Russia's possible role in all of this, as well as some new technologies, and of course adrenochrome's role in all of this, and the symbolism of the soccer ball, which we've seen many different people involved in, including Bill Gates, Vladimir Putin, and Melania Trump, who you can see right here, placing it on the Christmas tree, making it very prominent. The following year, she left us with a simple message, just one name placard, and I will leave you with that name, Rose.
And now she was my rose.